The afternoon sun blazed over the small town of Riverton, a place divided not by vast distances, but by wealth and status. The heat shimmered off the pavement, distorting the view of the quiet streets and casting a golden haze over the bustling town square. It was one of those summer days when the air felt heavy and still, and every movement seemed to take more effort than usual. Children hid in the shade, vendors wiped sweat from their brows, and the scent of sizzling street food wafted lazily through the air. Lucas, a 15-year-old boy from the far side of town, the side most residents pretended didn't exist, walked purposefully through the square. His family was poor, scraping by on his mother's meager earnings as a seamstress, and Lucas did everything he could to help. He had just come from the local market, a simple canvas bag slung over his shoulder filled with the basics: bread, a few vegetables, and a carton of eggs. His clothes hung loosely on his lean frame, his shoes worn down to thin soles with visible holes in them. The harsh rays of the sun beat down relentlessly on his back, causing sweat to trickle down his neck. His brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully navigated the uneven sidewalk, mindful not to drop the precious groceries. They couldn't afford any accidents. Lucas's thoughts drifted to his family, imagining how pleased his mother would be when he returned. She worked long hours and he did whatever he could to ease her burden. He had grown up faster than most kids his age, hardened by a life where every coin mattered. But despite the hardships, Lucas had a kind heart. He wasn't bitter. He was grateful. Grateful for his family, for the small house they lived in, and for the fact that they had each other. Today was just another day, an ordinary afternoon in his routine of helping out at home. As Lucas reached the center of the square, the town's contrasting worlds became all the more evident. On one side were the small, crumbling houses of the working class. On the other, grand estates with manicured lawns belonging to the town's elite. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn, separating the haves from the have-nots. And striding across that line, without a care in the world, was Emma Donovan. Emma, the daughter of Riverton's wealthiest man, Mr. Donovan, was walking along the sidewalk, completely engrossed in her phone. She moved with the ease and confidence that came with never having to worry about life's small struggles. Her designer clothes stood in stark contrast to Lucas's worn-out outfit, and her sleek black sunglasses shielded her from the glaring sun. In her world, there were no concerns about groceries, rent, or worn-out shoes. Life was about social gatherings, private schools, and luxury vacations. At that moment, Emma was texting her friends, barely aware of her surroundings, her attention consumed by the small screen in her hand. Lucas, too, might have ignored her, if not for what happened next. A distant rumble cut through the stifling heat, growing louder with each passing second. At first, it was just background noise, blending in with the chatter of the square. But soon, the sound sharpened into the unmistakable roar of a car engine revving too hard. Lucas looked up, scanning the streets for the source, his instincts suddenly alert. His eyes locked onto a car, a sleek, dark sedan, barreling down the narrow street at a dangerous speed. The driver, distracted or perhaps reckless, was swerving wildly, far too close to the sidewalk where pedestrians strolled. And in its path, directly ahead, was Emma, completely oblivious to the danger. In that instant, time seemed to slow down. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his veins. Without thinking, without hesitation, he dropped his grocery bag, the eggs cracking as they hit the pavement. His mind wasn't on the groceries anymore. It was on Emma. She didn't see the car. She didn't hear it. She was just a few steps away from walking straight into its deadly path. "Watch out!" Lucas shouted, his voice full of urgency. But she didn't hear him. She was still lost in her phone, texting away, unaware of the disaster looming over her. Lucas bolted into action. Every muscle in his body tensed as he sprinted toward her, his worn shoes slapping against the hot pavement. The sedan swerved closer, the tires screeching, leaving black marks on the road. And then, just in time, Lucas reached her. He lunged forward, grabbing her arm and yanking her away from the edge of the sidewalk. The force of the pull sent them both crashing to the ground, Emma's phone flying from her hand and shattering on the pavement beside them. The car screeched past, narrowly avoiding the two teenagers by mere inches. The rush of air from its passing lifted dust and loose papers, leaving behind the acrid smell of burning rubber. It continued down the road, disappearing around the corner, as if nothing had happened. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Lucas lay on the ground, panting, his heart still racing as he tried to process what had just happened. Emma sat beside him, wide-eyed and disoriented, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She looked at Lucas as though she couldn't quite believe what had just transpired. "Are you okay?" Lucas finally managed to ask, his voice strained from the adrenaline. He sat up, brushing the dirt off his torn clothes, but the concern in his eyes was genuine. Emma blinked at him, still too shocked to respond. Her perfectly styled hair was now slightly tousled, and her expensive sunglasses had been knocked askew, but she was otherwise unharmed. Slowly she nodded, her mind still catching up to the events of the last few seconds. Lucas exhaled in relief, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. He glanced back at the scattered groceries, his family's dinner ruined, but at least she was safe. That was all that mattered. Emma started, her voice shaky, but the words seemed to fail her. She looked down at the shattered remains of her phone, then back up at Lucas. For the first time, she truly saw him, his ragged appearance, his frayed shoes, the groceries now wasted on the ground. But most of all, she saw his eyes, still full of concern despite everything. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lucas offered a small, tired smile. "Just be careful next time." Emma, still in shock, glanced around as people began to gather, drawn by the commotion. She knew she should say more, should offer something, but the words stuck in her throat. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, it was a sense of realization, a dawning awareness of the vast difference between their worlds, and how, in that moment, it hadn't mattered. Without another word, Lucas stood, brushed off the dirt from his worn pants, and looked down at the cracked eggs and spilled groceries with a sigh. It wasn't much, but it was everything his family had for that day. Still, he didn't regret it. Not for a second. "Thank you," Emma repeated, a little stronger this time, as if finally finding her voice. Lucas nodded once, then turned away, leaving her sitting there, still shaken, surrounded by curious onlookers. He didn't stay to see their reactions. He had done what he came to do, and now he had to go home. Empty-handed, but filled with a strange sense of satisfaction. As he walked away, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the square. But something had changed. Lucas didn't know it yet, but that single act of bravery would ripple through both of their lives, altering their futures in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Before continuing, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. This really helps a lot and allows us to keep bringing you more amazing content. Your support makes all the difference to us. Now let's continue. That evening, Riverton's air was still heavy with the scorching heat of the day, but the tension inside the Donovan mansion was far more palpable. Mr. Donovan paced the length of his study, his mind racing as Emma recounted every detail of the near-tragic incident. As she spoke, Donovan's hands trembled ever so slightly. A father's worst nightmare had almost unfolded in front of his eyes. His only child, the light of his life, had come perilously close to a devastating accident. Emma sat across from her father, still visibly shaken, her hands clutching her broken phone as if it symbolized more than just a shattered device. It represented the fragility of life and how easily it could all be lost. Despite her usually calm and collected demeanor, she couldn't stop thinking about Lucas, the boy who had appeared out of nowhere and saved her. He didn't hesitate, Dad," Emma said softly, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. "I didn't even see the car, but he did. And he saved me. Without him..." Her words trailed off, the weight of what might have happened pressing down on her chest. Mr. Donovan's jaw tightened. The thought of losing his daughter filled him with a deep, gut-wrenching dread. In his world of wealth and power, he was used to being in control, able to solve any problem with money or influence. But this was different. This was something he couldn't buy his way out of. He owed his daughter's life to a boy from the other side of town, someone who had nothing, yet had given him everything. Donovan nodded firmly, determination settling into his features. "We need to find him," he said, his voice resolute. "We need to find Lucas and thank him properly." Emma looked up, relief washing over her. "He didn't even want anything, Dad. He just walked away." "That's exactly why we need to do something for him," Donovan replied, his mind already formulating a plan. Anyone else might have expected a reward, but he did it because it was the right thing to do. And that kind of courage, it deserves recognition. That night, Mr. Donovan couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying the image of his daughter, safe but shaken, and the faceless boy who had given her that safety. In the early hours of the morning, before the sun even rose, Donovan made a decision. He would find Lucas, and he would offer him anything his heart desired. It was the least he could do. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the oppressive heat of the previous day softened by a gentle breeze. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the quiet streets of Riverton began to stir. Meanwhile, at the Grand Donovan estate, preparations were already in motion. Mr. Donovan had instructed his driver to scour the town for Lucas, the boy who had become an unexpected hero. By mid-morning, the search had led to the far side of Riverton, where the narrow streets wound between small, crumbling houses. Lucas had no idea that his life was about to change. He had woken up early as usual to help his mother with errands. The cracked eggs from the day before were a minor setback. They would simply make do with what they had, as they always did. Life in their small, run-down home was hard, but it was familiar, and Lucas was used to its challenges. He was returning from fetching water when a sleek black car pulled up beside him, gleaming in the sunlight like a creature from another world. The driver, dressed in a sharp black suit, stepped out and approached him. Lucas hesitated, gripping the handle of his empty bucket tightly. "Are you Lucas?" the driver asked, his tone polite but firm. Lucas nodded slowly, his heart starting to race. Why would someone like this be looking for him? "The Donovans would like to see you," the driver continued. "Please, come with me." Lucas's mind raced. The Donovans? He had heard of them, of course. Everyone in Riverton knew the name. They were the richest family in town, living in a world so far removed from his own that it might as well have been a different planet. But why would they want to see him? Was it about yesterday? Had something gone wrong? With a mix of curiosity and nervousness, Lucas climbed into the back seat of the car, feeling the cool leather beneath his hands. As they drove through town, the familiar sights of his neighborhood gave way to the pristine, tree-lined streets of the wealthy district. The houses here were enormous, each one more opulent than the last, with manicured lawns and gates that shimmered in the sunlight. It felt surreal, like he had been transported into a dream. When they arrived at the Donovan estate, Lucas's breath caught in his throat. The mansion was like nothing he had ever seen. Towering pillars, sprawling gardens, and a massive fountain that sparkled with crystal-clear water. Everything about it screamed wealth and power. Lucas felt small in comparison, his ragged clothes and worn-out shoes making him painfully aware of the divide between his world and theirs. The driver led Lucas inside, through grand hallways lined with expensive artwork and marble floors that gleamed underfoot. The ceiling was impossibly high, adorned with chandeliers that glittered like stars. Lucas had never felt more out of place in his life. His stomach churned with nerves, and he found himself clutching his hands together, trying to steady himself as they approached a set of double doors. The driver knocked once and opened the doors, gesturing for Lucas to step inside. The room beyond was a vast sitting area, tastefully decorated with rich, dark wood furniture and plush sofas. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the space with natural light, and expensive paintings adorned every wall. In the center of the room stood Mr. Donovan and Emma. Mr. Donovan's expression was serious, but not unkind. Emma, standing beside her father, gave Lucas a small, grateful smile. "You must be Lucas," Mr. Donovan said, stepping forward. His voice was deep and commanding, yet there was a softness to it, a tone of gratitude that Lucas hadn't expected. "My daughter told me what happened yesterday. You saved her life, and for that, my family owes you a great debt." Lucas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. I just did what anyone would do," he mumbled. His voice was barely audible in the grand room, as though it didn't belong in such a place. But Mr. Donovan shook his head, his expression resolute. "No," he said firmly. "You did something extraordinary. You showed bravery, quick thinking, and selflessness. I cannot even imagine what might have happened if you hadn't been there." Lucas felt a surge of emotion in his chest, part pride, part discomfort. He didn't feel like a hero. He had simply acted in the moment, doing what he thought was right. But here he was, standing in front of the wealthiest man in Riverton, being thanked for something he hadn't given a second thought to. Emma stepped forward then, her eyes soft as she met Lucas's gaze. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "I didn't even realize the danger until it was too late. You saved me." Lucas felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment. He had never been one for attention, and standing in front of these people who seemed to live in a completely different universe, made him feel exposed. "Thank you," he said awkwardly, his voice small. Mr. Donovan nodded, his gratitude evident. "I want to offer you something, Lucas," he said, his tone suddenly more formal. "Anything you want, money, a job, education, name it, and it's yours." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Anything? His mind raced with possibilities. His family could be taken care of. His mother wouldn't have to work so hard. Maybe they could even move out of their dilapidated home. The possibilities were endless. But as he stood there, staring at the man offering him the world, something shifted inside Lucas. He thought about his family, about the long nights his mother spent sewing by the dim light of their old lamp. He thought about the cracked eggs on the sidewalk, the groceries he couldn't bring home the day before, and then he thought about what really mattered to him. I don't need money," Lucas said slowly, surprising himself. "But Mweash, if you really want to help, there's one thing you could do." Mr. Donovan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Anything. Just name it." Lucas swallowed hard, then looked up, meeting the millionaire's gaze. "Help my family. My mom. She works so hard, but we barely get by. I don't want anything for myself, but if you could help her, it would mean everything to me." For a moment, there was silence in the room. Emma looked at Lucas with a mixture of admiration and surprise. Mr. Donovan, too, seemed taken aback. He had expected the boy to ask for money, a car, maybe even a scholarship. But instead, Lucas had asked for something far more selfless. His request was simple, yet profound. Mr. Donovan's eyes softened, and for the first time in years, a lump formed in his throat. He blinked back the unexpected emotion welling up inside him and nodded slowly. "Of course," he said, his voice thick. "I'll do everything I can to help your family. You have my word." Lucas exhaled, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. He hadn't expected to feel this way, but somehow he knew he had made the right choice. As he left the Donovan mansion that day, Lucas couldn't help but feel that his life had changed, not because of the wealth and power he had just been offered, but because of the choice he had made to stay true to who he was and to what really mattered. Lucas stood there staring down at the polished marble floor of the Donovan mansion, nervously twisting his hands. Mr. Donovan's words echoed in his mind. "Anything you want, just name it, and it's yours." The enormity of the offer made Lucas feel small, out of place, and overwhelmed. He didn't know what to say. He had never been offered anything before. For a boy who had grown up with very little, the idea of asking for something, anything, felt foreign, wrong even. But Mr. Donovan waited patiently, his gaze unwavering as he stood beside his daughter, Emma, who watched Lucas with wide eyes, curious about what he would ask for. Her father was a man of his word, and she knew that if Lucas requested the world, her father would move mountains to give it to him. Seconds felt like hours as the room fell silent. Lucas's mind raced, trying to process the moment. He could ask for money, enough to pull his family out of poverty forever. He could ask for a new home, a scholarship, or even a chance to attend one of the private schools on the other side of town, the ones with kids who wore clean uniforms and didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. But as the possibilities spun around in his head, Lucas thought about his mother. He thought about the long hours she worked at the local diner, coming home exhausted with aching feet and a tired smile, always telling him that everything would be okay. Lucas knew it wasn't. He had watched his mother sacrifice everything for him and his siblings, day after day, year after year. She never complained, but he could see the weight she carried, the fatigue in her eyes. It broke his heart, and he knew she deserved better. With that thought, clarity came. He knew what to ask for, not for himself, but for her. Lucas looked up, his brown eyes meeting Mr. Donovan's. "Sir," he started, his voice trembling slightly. I don't want anything for myself. He hesitated for a moment, trying to find the right words. I just want a better life for my family. My mom works so hard, too hard. She never complains, but I know she's tired, and it's hard for her. If you could help her find a better job, something that doesn't wear her down so much, that would be enough for me. The room went silent once more, but this time the silence was heavy, filled with emotion. Emma's expression softened as she glanced at her father, who was clearly taken aback by the boy's humble request. Mr. Donovan had expected Lucas to ask for something grand, something that would benefit him directly, a reward worthy of saving his daughter's life. But instead, the boy had asked for something selfless, something so simple yet so profound. For a moment, Mr. Donovan didn't know how to respond. He had spent years building his wealth, surrounding himself with luxury, and solving problems with money. But Lucas's request struck something deep within him. It was a reminder that not everything could be solved with wealth. The boy standing before him had the opportunity to ask for riches, to change his own life in an instant, yet he had chosen to focus on the well-being of his mother. Mr. Donovan swallowed hard, his throat tightening as the emotion welled up. He was a powerful man, used to being in control of his emotions, but this simple request from a poor boy had pierced through his armor. His eyes glistened, and he struggled to find his voice. "Your mother," Mr. Donovan finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "You want me to help your mother?" Lucas nodded, his expression serious but hopeful. "She deserves it," he said softly. "She's worked so hard for so long. If she could have a job that doesn't hurt her so much, that's all I want." Mr. Donovan felt a lump form in his throat as he glanced at Emma, who was equally moved. The sincerity in Lucas's eyes and the depth of his character were undeniable. It wasn't every day that someone, especially someone so young, would pass up the opportunity to better their own life for the sake of another. For years, Mr. Donovan had been surrounded by people who chased after wealth and status, people who thought only of themselves. But this boy who had nothing, had a heart so pure that it humbled the billionaire in a way he hadn't expected. Without warning, a tear slipped down Mr. Donovan's cheek. He quickly wiped it away, trying to compose himself. He had been through so much in his life, had faced countless challenges and hardships. But this moment, standing in his own home, looking at a boy who had asked for nothing but kindness for his mother, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Emma reached out and touched her father's arm gently, her own eyes misty. She had grown up in privilege, never wanting for anything, but Lucas's words had touched her deeply. It was as if a door had opened inside her, showing her a world beyond her own, one filled with struggles she had never known. Mr. Donovan took a deep breath and placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "I will help your mother," he said, his voice resolute. "I'll make sure she has a job that values her, something that allows her to come home without the weight of the world on her shoulders. You have my word." Lucas's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, sir," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you so much." But Mr. Donovan wasn't finished. "And Lucas," he added, his tone soft but firm, "I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, you can come to me. You've done more for my family than I can ever repay." Lucas nodded, overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness being offered to him. He had never expected anything like this when he had rushed to save Emma the day before. But now, standing in the Donovan mansion, he realized that sometimes, when you act selflessly, the world has a way of giving back in ways you could never imagine. And as Lucas left the mansion that day, his heart was light, knowing that his mother's life was about to change for the better. But more than that, he carried with him the knowledge that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to create ripples that could change lives. Mr. Donovan's words echoed through the vast, opulent room, but to Lucas it felt like time had frozen. His mind raced, trying to process the weight of what had just been offered to him. College? His family taken care of? The boy, who had grown up dreaming only of making it through each day, now stood on the precipice of a future he had never dared to imagine. For a moment, Lucas didn't know what to say. His throat tightened, and he could feel a lump forming as he fought back tears. This was too much. It wasn't about being undeserving. It was the sheer contrast of this moment compared to the life he'd always known, a life of scarcity and struggle. And now, here was this man, this powerful figure, offering him and his family a path to a completely different future. "Sir," Lucas started, his voice trembling, I don't know what to say." Mr. Donovan's eyes softened. "You don't have to say anything, Lucas. Just know that sometimes the world surprises you. You did something incredible, and now it's time for that kindness to come back to you." Lucas blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. The weight of all those nights spent in a crumbling house, watching his mother work herself to the bone, thinking that there would never be a way out. Those memories weighed heavy on his young shoulders, and now it felt like a burden was being lifted, one he never thought he'd be free from. Emma, who had been quietly watching the entire exchange, stepped forward. She had been raised in privilege but had never seen someone like Lucas, someone so genuine and selfless. She felt an admiration growing for him, not just for saving her life, but for who he was. She smiled gently, as if to reassure him that all of this was real, and he deserved every bit of it. "Lucas," she said softly, "you saved my life. What my father is offering, it's not just a reward. It's a thank you for being the kind of person who didn't hesitate to help someone else." Lucas turned to Emma, her words sinking in. Her eyes sparkled with sincerity, and for the first time, Lucas didn't feel so out of place in this mansion. Maybe he did belong here, not because of his circumstances, but because of his actions. Maybe he had more to offer the world than he had ever realized. Mr. Donovan cleared his throat again, the businessman in him coming forward. "I'll make the arrangements for your mother's job today. She'll start immediately, and we'll ensure she's in a position that values her as much as you do. And as for you, Lucas, whenever you're ready, we'll begin planning for your education. I want you to have every opportunity available." Lucas could only nod, his heart too full to speak. It was more than he had ever dreamed possible. He thought of his mother, how she had always tried to protect him from the harsh realities of their life, always reassuring him that things would get better, even when she didn't believe it herself. Now he couldn't wait to tell her that those dreams she'd whispered to him at night were finally coming true. Mr. Donovan looked at Lucas once more, his face a mixture of respect and awe. "Lucas, you've reminded me of something I had forgotten, what it means to be truly generous, not just with money, but with the heart. Thank you for that." For the first time in the conversation, Lucas allowed himself to smile fully. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," he said, his voice steady now, filled with quiet determination. "I'll make sure I don't waste this chance." And in that moment, surrounded by the grandeur of wealth and privilege, Lucas felt a flicker of something new inside him. Hope, not just for himself, but for his mother, for their future, and for the belief that sometimes life really could turn around in the most unexpected ways. The transformation in Lucas's life was almost unbelievable. True to his promise, Mr. Donovan not only arranged a well-paying job for Lucas's mother, but he ensured it was one where she felt respected and valued. She now worked in the Donovan family's main office, managing the staff, and for the first time in years, she walked with her head held high. Her face, once etched with worry and fatigue, now glowed with pride. Their dilapidated home was repaired, the roof no longer leaked, and the creaking floorboards were replaced. The constant strain of figuring out how to make ends meet was replaced by a sense of peace that Lucas had never known. Lucas, too, was changing. He dedicated himself to his schoolwork, knowing that every good grade, every completed assignment brought him one step closer to a future that once felt impossible. The promise of college wasn't just a lifeline, it was a symbol of everything he could achieve. He would wake up early to study, even after helping his mother with her new responsibilities at home. His mind always focused on the opportunities that lay ahead. What once seemed like a never-ending cycle of struggle had become a life of hope and possibility. But what surprised Lucas the most was how his relationship with Mr. Donovan had grown. The millionaire, who had once seemed so far removed from his world, became something of a mentor to him. Mr. Donovan would invite Lucas to the mansion, not just to visit, but to talk. They would sit in the sprawling library, surrounded by shelves full of books, and Mr. Donovan would share his life experiences, offering advice and encouragement. He would tell Lucas about the mistakes he'd made in his youth, the importance of compassion in business, and the value of loyalty to one's family. "You have something money can't buy, Lucas," Mr. Donovan would say, looking at him with deep respect. "You have heart. That's what will make you successful in life." Lucas listened, absorbing the lessons like a sponge. But it wasn't just the guidance that left a mark on him. It was the kindness. Mr. Donovan treated Lucas like an equal, not someone to pity or simply reward for a heroic act. In those moments, Lucas realized that what had started as a simple act of courage on the day he saved Emma had turned into a bond that crossed the boundaries of wealth and status. As the months turned into years, Lucas flourished. He excelled in his studies, won scholarships, and soon enough, he was ready to attend one of the most prestigious universities in the country, something he never could have imagined before. On the day of his departure, the entire Donovan family came to see him off, Emma included. She had grown into a poised, confident young woman, and the gratitude she still felt toward Lucas had deepened into genuine friendship. They hugged before he boarded the bus to his new life, both knowing that their bond would last forever. Meanwhile, Lucas's mother continued to thrive in her new job, growing more confident with each passing day. She couldn't believe how far they had come, from barely scraping by to having enough security to plan for the future. She never missed a chance to remind Lucas how proud she was of him and how grateful she was for Mr. Donovan's generosity. But the transformation went both ways. For Mr. Donovan, helping Lucas had changed him too. Over time, he came to realize that all the wealth and success he had accumulated meant little without a meaningful way to use it. Helping Lucas and his mother had filled a void in his life, something deeper than he had ever expected. It wasn't just about charity, it was about learning how to give back in a way that truly made a difference. He began to shift his business focus, investing in projects that would improve the lives of others. Affordable housing, education programs, and charitable organizations became his new priorities. And every time he made a decision to invest in the future of someone else, he thought of Lucas. For Lucas, the journey was just beginning. College opened his eyes to a world of possibilities. He studied economics and business, determined to use the knowledge he gained to make a difference, much like Mr. Donovan had for him. But his ultimate goal was bigger than that. He wanted to give back to his community, to help other families who struggled as his had, and to ensure that no child ever had to worry about where their next meal would come from or if they'd have a roof over their head. Years later, after graduating with honors, Lucas returned to Riverton, not as the poor boy who had once saved a millionaire's daughter, but as a man with a mission. He opened community centers, created job training programs, and worked closely with Mr. Donovan's foundation to bring lasting change to the town that had shaped him. On a warm afternoon, standing on the steps of one of the new community centers he had built, Lucas looked out at the people gathered to celebrate the opening. His mother stood beside him, her face glowing with pride, while Mr. Donovan and Emma smiled from the front row. It was a full-circle moment, one that reminded Lucas of the day he had stood nervously in the foyer of the Donovan mansion, asking for nothing but a better life for his family. That day, years ago, Lucas had saved Emma's life. But in many ways, Mr. Donovan had saved his too. And now, Lucas was determined to pay that kindness forward, one life at a time. For Mr. Donovan, the journey had been equally transformative. The once cold businessman had learned that wealth was not the true measure of success. Love, compassion, and generosity were. Watching Lucas grow into the man he had become brought tears to his eyes. And for the first time in his life, Mr. Donovan felt like he had truly left a legacy worth being proud of. And so, in the end, the town of Riverton, once divided by wealth and status, was brought closer together, all because of one selfless act. A boy who had risked his life to save a girl, and in doing so, changed the course of both their lives forever. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.